Hello, friends, fans, and foes. I'm Fancy Fatale. In this video, I'll be going over the process and how I create comics. I've been creating my webcomic, Tales of Yonder, for around 4 or so, maybe more years at this point, so I thought it might be good to perhaps share my process and how I got to where I am, since some people are curious. If you don't like my comics, that's fine. You don't have to watch the video, or perhaps you want to watch the video and still get something out of it. That's fine too. But I just wanted to put out what I've learned, the difficult things that I've had to figure out after years of figuring it out from scratch. This video may be good for new artists or creators who are curious where possibly to start when they have a slight idea that they might want to make a comic, or it can be good for a well-developed comic creator who wants to perhaps just bounce ideas off me or see the process of another artist. We will be reviewing the process, common pitfalls, and fun practices to keep you going today. So without further ado, let us pick up our Apple pencils, our paintbrushes, our pencils, and get into the process. Step 1, inspiration. You either start with characters' motivations or a story, but you have to make it relatable or interesting in any way. An example of motivations could be the motivations or morals of a society, a group, or your character in general. For this, you want to have something perhaps drastic so that it intrigues the reader. Why would they want to pick it up? If it's regarding fiction, you want something so outlandish but believable that it's a story where you're like, oh, so history went that way this time. Perhaps everyone values their independence so much that there's no structure to the society. Perhaps the society is so independent that there's no structure and these characters want structure. Or maybe it's literally just there are aliens and people do not like aliens because they are different from us. Or a society, like for example in my comic Nobody Throws Rocks, where knowledge is above all the most important thing. And scientists are actually seen as priests. They are the religious figures. Knowledge is the religion. And in that way, it does end up being what religions sometimes end up being, which is restraining and everything else when you get people in power who want to control the knowledge that's given out. So that one's a very fun one to work with. Otherwise, if the morals or the story itself is not what's driving people in particular and how weird it is, it could be the morals of the character. In Tales of Yonder, Lita is a morally apparently corrupt person who just wants to have fun, and that's very relatable to people. But she also has a side of her that is a bit misunderstood. Maybe some people will get it, maybe some people will just empathize and want to figure out how she will work through her emotions. She has an apparent trauma. We don't know what that trauma was that caused her current mindset, and she does not recall it. So it's intriguing, hopefully, the readers, so that they want to keep going and figure out how this odd premise of Feywild interacts with that issue that she has. Or in other morals, we have Talks from Oath. Her morals aren't made apparent just yet. She seems to want to seek knowledge, and she's very secretive, and that will just have to open up as you read the comic. So that still leaves the intrigue open, as we cannot read the main character too much yet. You could also just start with the visual creation of a character. That's actually somewhat how I also started Nobody Rocks. Jen was just a character design I made from space concepts because I enjoy space. And then she slowly developed, the characters around her developed, and I made more based on this science fiction science, where it's concepts of science that aren't real yet until we develop them more. The main point here in step 1, inspiration, is what has made you want to make comic pages? What has made you want to develop this world? Is it a character that you want to make star in something? Is it a moral that you want to teach the reader? Or is it just an odd concept that's really funny? This brings us to step 2, realization. Start small. Doodles, character studies, even mini comics. Develop a style and personalities for the characters within your comic. If you have this concept, you have to be so passionate about it that you, whenever you have time to, either have a sketchbook or your iPad with you, and you are doodling these characters. You are working on their design. We are working on interactions between them, the main character, and all the other ones around it. Perhaps a dynamic that you want to present, a huge issue you want to present. You can doodle that concept. Mini comics are a method that a lot of people use, and one that I used for 2 years before I even started the larger comic book process, which is just 4 panels, and it's a quick study on how to storytell and come to a conclusion with just those 4 panels. You could use dynamic angles, but in the end, it's just about telling that quick joke, story, etc. with the 4 panels. You have this setup, you have an interaction or a reaction, and then you have the punchline. So you want to be able to have a pause or some other thing in that to develop that and make it enjoyable to the reader. In this realization stage, it's also important to know that you aren't restricted or nothing is set in stone necessarily yet on what you're doing with this comic. You can work on different scene studies and realize that you want a different aesthetic for things. Modify your style perhaps to make sure it fits the idea of the story. If it's more tense, it can go with a harder style, or if it's more lighthearted, you can go with lighter colors, pastels. That's up to you, or you could stick with your style that you always do because it's your style and this is your story. But the main point here is to not get worried. Don't get stressed out as you're developing all this, because it will feel overwhelming. When you have hundreds of sketches, hundreds of character studies or concepts, hundreds of product or location or item designs, the script for the story, it may become overwhelming. That's why you want to work on smaller projects such as mini comics first, to feel out how everything works. This brings us to step 3. Set goals and boundaries. Before jumping into the pages, it is very important to establish the world completely. So with this, you want to make sure you understand at least the basics of the characters, what group they're in, where they start, the main factions in the world, if the government is as the government is as you know, if society is generally how people know it, and what are the main morals, as we discussed, or designs of this world that make it interesting and in particular, and how are you going to establish that within your comic for the readers to understand. Also in this point, you want to set and establish what you're going to be creating. What is the first part of this project, so you don't get overwhelmed and want to create everything right away. With this, you want to do writing in this process. You want to write out perhaps a chapter or an arc. An arc would be in a cartoon or a show. It'll be a handful of episodes that present an issue or a foe, and then have the build up, everything else that leads to the climax of that story, and then the resolution of that story. Arcs are just something that a reader or a watcher can get into and then have a conclusion with. It doesn't have to be the end of the story, but it could be something that you could start with to make it a goal that is achievable and not overwhelming when you begin this process. Also in this step, you want to establish what type of story is this. Is it webcomic or web exclusive? It'll be on webtoons or tapas. Do you want to make it a scroll style thing? Or do you want to make it an eventual print possibility? Because that is very important before you literally start drawing the comic. If you create all of your pages based on the fact that people are scrolling to see them, then it is going to be very difficult to put that into a print template later for a graphic novel type of printing. You want to have either that set up first and then restructure those panels for digital, or decide which one you want to do right away. You don't want to restrict yourself. And I believe by choosing exclusively a scroll setup, you might be restricting yourself. So it is important to decide if you want to make it print eventually. For example, here I'll show you my stories. We have Tales of Yonder. I have developed an arc for each of them so far. For Feyward, we have Lita and the Vryloka arc. Then we have Talks. Her arc is still ongoing, and it's not exactly stated as hers is a bit of a more major arc. And then Tempest has just begun with 1 issue. Her arc is very obvious. She's enslaved on an island. Arcs allow you to have a stopping point if you wanted to pause to create another project or story, or in general just have somewhere to breathe. This is a good point to do that. It's a good point for your readers to have a place of understanding the story has gone, ready for the next part. Step 4, solidifying the world. In this step, you want to fully develop your characters, make a character sheet for them, understand their personality, understand their goals and their perspective on the world. You want to develop major scenes or locations for your comic. Even if it's just in a concept art style, you want to fully understand them. And then you want to have the actual story developed in a written format. You want to have that script, or however you process and develop it, already developed, and then you start sketching thumbnails in the process here, so you can fully see that entire issue or an update. as some people call it, which they will make between 11 and 40 pages is what I've seen throughout my research. Graphic novels that are well known in Marvel and everything will do 11 in a printed comic. It feels a little bit lackluster for me. So I usually go towards more of a 30. And some people who make their stories more chapter or story based, they'll make it 40 plus, like an actual chapter in a book. I would recommend something slightly smaller and perhaps reviewing those thumbnails and seeing if it fully tells a story but doesn't drag on too long and has a climax to that certain issue and how it makes sense to you as you read it in the thumbnails in this stage. It's also important to develop the secondary characters and concept arts for them, perhaps character sheets if you have time, but it's okay to slowly develop character sheets, because if you really want to get into the story and if you have the gist of that character, they will become more developed in the story as you keep drawing them. There's not much to this step other than you need to practice a lot and make sure you are comfortable with your style, with your thumbnails, with your character designs, and with the concepts of the world before you get into the formal process. I will, however, go over the actual mini process of developing a page. In my time, I usually create thumbnails, which a lot of artists that I've seen make comics sometimes skip the thumbnails. I wouldn't recommend this, because if you want to have an issue make sense, if you want it to come together and have a conclusion and be a good length and have a climax and a build-up, you need to watch visually as those sketches come together what it leads up to and what comparisons, what foreshadowing you might have. It is important to see the issue before it is realized. After a thumbnail, I usually export those sketches into full pages. You need to confirm the template for your pages. I'll show my template here. On the size that is good for your device. If you work on a computer, it can be usually any size for whatever program you're working in. But if you're working on an iPad, it may be restricted based on pixel sizes and that app's restrictions, perhaps. And you want to make sure that your art quality is of high caliber. And later on, you can always compress it for a website or other locations. Once you have done that, you want to rough sketch over that thumbnail to further rough or detail sketch. You can go and mix this process, but what you want to be comfortable with is understanding what is in that page. You don't want to leave things up to guessing when you go into the inking stage. The next step would be to ink after you are comfortable with your sketch. So that could have a rough sketch and then a detailed sketch process before it. But regardless, that ink stage will be a bit simpler if everything is fully realized before you go into it. The next stage after that is flatting your pages. This will be kind of laying out the planes and where the characters are. And I sometimes mix in this stage with the base colors of characters, so it doesn't look like, it kind of looks like it's being colored, but it's not fully colored. And sometimes the character is just one base color and doesn't have their actual hair and everything yet. But it's how I understand that page is basically ready to go, and I sometimes jump into rendering along with the rest of those flats. But after the flat colors, the flats are basically a process in which you just understand which colors are where. You don't add lighting, you don't add shading, you don't add volume. The next and last stage, give or take, is the render stage. This is where you will add volume. This is where you will utilize shadows and lighting to make things look fully realized. And within this stage, or some people count it as the final one after this, there is post-production, which is understanding where actual lighting is, and then you add speech bubbles and text to that. And you want to make sure the whole page makes sense and it works together when you finalize and you're ready to post it. Another quick mention, back in the thumbnailing and the rough to detailed sketch stage, you do want to make sure you're counting for speech bubbles. Not a lot of people think of this, and you have to understand how much is being said in that page to allow the character to be in the corner of a small panel or perhaps somewhere else, but you want to make sure whatever you're drawing isn't being wasted because you have to put a huge speech bubble over it. So it's good to mark that, ensure that you don't over detail under it. This brings us to step 5, the production schedule. It is important to understand your limitations or understand your capabilities. You want to test out perhaps drawing only one page per week or every 2 weeks and see if you're able to increase that amount to make it 2 or 3. 5 if you're able to, but I would never recommend overworking yourself because that will lead to burnout. So you perhaps want to test this out for a month or so and then reevaluate, see if you need to decrease that production or increase that production. And that's pretty much this entire step, is just understanding what works for you in production. Step 6 is kind of just a continuation of step 5. It is time to create the comic. Set out your path. Work on the project. Make sure you're committed and do this for a good while. And after a few months or a year, if it's been going well, then you want to work into the next step. The next and final step would be review your work process and get ready to continue or stop. Don't get in over your head. If you want to make this a career, you have to make a schedule and a work process that'll work for you and allow you to have time outside of the creating process to see loved ones, to either have another job to bring in income, and or do your hobbies. If you want to treat this as a hobby itself, you're going to want to go with a much slower work process because you won't want to overwork it and you won't enjoy your hobby anymore. If you're treating this like a career as I do, it is important to keep a schedule and understand your limitations and perhaps take weeks off when you need to and then bulk up on pages the week after that. A lot of people have buffers, which I highly recommend. I haven't had that in a little while, but it's good to have pages that are already finished and haven't been posted yet. So if there's a week where you cannot post, you can post those buffer pages. Also, if you feel overwhelmed but want to make it a career, you can always reach out to friends or hire on people to help you in the process. I haven't done this and I wouldn't do this because I treat this as a passion project that I want to do myself. You can hire on inkers, a sketch artist, flat artist. Having a flat artist is very good because if they understand your characters and you give them the palettes and everything else, it makes it very easy just to go in and render after you have sketched and inked it. You can also get a person who does the text as well, which may be difficult for some people when they don't want to either draw in certain parts of the text or realize where to put it and everything like that. I'm going to leave it there for this video. I'll leave common pitfalls, fun practices, and other things for another video as this is going on a bit longer than I expected. But thank you so much for watching my video. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Perhaps if you're an artist, comment your differing opinions, or if you're a new artist, what you've already tried, if you want to come back to the video later and add your insight on it, or ask questions if I haven't been clear enough in any part of this video so far. Just as a reminder, you can read my comic at www.fancyfatale.com right here. You can support me on Patreon, as well as donate to me if you found any of this helpful. With that, it's going to have to be the end of it, and I'll see you in the next video. But remember to record your stats, your abilities, and your spell slots, because this will continue in the next video. Bye-bye.